Hey everyone, it's Actual here. Just making this video right now to sort of complement the gameplay that you're seeing here. These are just basically my thoughts on Neverwinter, a Dungeons & Dragons style massively multiplayer online role-playing game that was recently announced for free for the Xbox One, and of course, being free, I thought, well, why not? So naturally, because the game was free to play, it had me raising an eyebrow, wondering, of course, it was going to be riddled with microtransactions. And, of course, the answer is kind of yes, it is. But not to the point where it's actually considerably a problem. And I'll get into that as I'm talking about it and sort of get my ideas out there. But first I'm going to talk about the fact that haven't played a considerable amount of massively multiplayer online role-playing games. I have played my fair share, of course, over the years. Naturally, World of Warcraft, when it came out, when it was still in its prime, when we were having, remember, everyone had like the Mr. T commercials and all that, and all the like the Ozzy Osbourne, Wrath of the Lich King. I don't actually remember when I got into it. Well, when I bought the, I think it was around Cataclysm. When that came out, I bought a Games Chest version of it, and I got into it, played it for a little while, got the free month, and of course picked up a time card. This stupid thing where, in order to even access a free month of an MMO, you actually have to confirm a payment method just so you can continue to use your game. You can't use your free month until you paid. In which case, it's not really a free month anymore now, is it? So, played World of Warcraft, which is pretty fun. But after a while, it just got grindy. But there were other MMOs that I played, of course. There was, if I remember, if this is the correct name or not, it was a Chinese-styled MMO known as, I think it was called Nine Dragons. And I played that with a few friends of mine back in the day. And it was pretty fun, if I remember correctly. It's that it was one of the first that I sunk some real time into, especially given the fact that it was free and not riddled with microtransactions at the time, if I remember correctly. I mean, there were advertisements all over the place where you had companies advertising their wares in the game during the loading screens and all that, but otherwise the game was free. So you took a bullet there to ensure that we didn't have the whole pay to win aspect back then, which was a thing, if I remember correctly. It was still in its infancy, but it was still kind of a thing. So I think the last MMO I put some considerable time into was Star Wars: The Old Republic. I was actually originally part of the beta testing process for that game, and it was the closed beta, I think. So I got into it, I saw what it was all about, and it really, I was going in, truthfully, in the original part, oh yeah, that's right, Star Wars Galaxies. I played Star Wars Galaxies, of course, back when that was a thing as well. Oh god, Star Wars Galaxies. Still, you can't see it right now, but my hand is up here pretty high right now, where it ranks as one of the best MMOs, sandbox MMOs of all time. It was a true sandbox, where you could do anything you really wanted. Where you could go out, build towns if you wanted to, create a whole multitude of items if you wanted to, and go all over the planet. And if you wanted to find someone, you actually had to go out there and find them. It was a true wilderness. And that was the best thing about it, is that it truly emulated what it was like to be like on a planet out there. Even if it was just like a wilderness, because, well, surprise, surprise, there are huge wastelands, even here on Earth, like in wide tracts of land where nobody was. But it was one of the best games of its time. And it was still one of the best games of its time because of its open world concept. After that, we considerably saw it less and less, and more the presence of the theme park MMO. I think World of Warcraft tended to balance this out by having a huge persistent sort of world where they weren't separated by instances. You could go anywhere you really wanted to. And that had that going for it. And then with Star Wars: The Old Republic, of course, it was separated by instance, and it was kind of closed off. It was a lot of loading between points and planets and all that, and I could sort of understand, because you were going to different planets, you were going all about, you were kind of in that sort of science fiction universe where you're going across the galaxy. So I could accept loading screens every now and again. But then we see like a big shift away again, like the closing. And I will talk about Destiny, where Destiny was marketed as an MMO, a persistent, a shared world shooter. And that isn't to say, like, of course, it was in essentially a functionable MMO in practice and in design. One that lied to us about a couple things, by the way, but that's not what this video is about, despite the fact that I played Destiny for about a month going through it and finally just putting it down, because Bungie had disappointed me on what they planned on delivering at their E3 conference, like the fact where you could jump in, you could materialize in like a person's instance by teleporting out of like a swooping ship. I remember they were talking about going through the rings of Saturn and all that, and that never came. It likely never will come. Well, at least until like the expansion, where you're gonna have to pay $30 for spaceship flying capabilities. It was a disappointment. It was satisfactory as a shooter, but it was a disappointment in the vision that they presented for us. So I thought I was off the MMO bandwagon, like, or at least giving a break. I mean, I would always give it a shot. So enter Neverwinter, which is a Dungeons & Dragons modeled game that would go after the D20 system and all that. And I like Dungeons & Dragons, of course. I played a little bit of Dungeons & Dragons for like a couple weeks on end, like a group of people where we had like the D20 style of games. And one of my friends, of course, played Dungeons & Dragons Online, and he thought this was okay, but he liked the other one more. He liked Dungeons & Dragons Online because it's so closely mirrored 3rd edition. I think it was 3rd edition that they played, and of course it meant that your stats had a whole lot more impact. Here, it's kind of actiony. Yes, you do have character stats, but there's not really all the much of the tabletop element here. So, jumping into this, it was good because it also started out where you as a character, you were thrust into the action. One of the things that I hate about MMOs when you start out and everything's hunky-dory, and yeah, everything's hunky-dory and all that, but you're doing essentially, and I'm going to quote Noah Antwiler on this one, doing bitch quests. And bitch quests are essentially things like going to deliver pie to somebody or going to kill rats. And that's really not a test of your heroic prowess. I mean, you're here, you're like a warrior, there's an army of undead outside, go stomp on a few rats for some copper. And that's one of the things that was sidestepped here, where you have an undead army, and that's one of the first quests in the game, is to sort of get adjusted to this great battle that's going on. And well, it sort of doesn't really measure up in like the opening cutscene, but what game ever did? But you were starting out as a hero. You started out as someone who was actually invested into this conflict that's happening, and that's one of the things I can give praise on this game for. So it's good to see that there is a good element of dungeon crawling. Like you're seeing me here, I'm going through the sewers right here. I believe I was going, I was fighting kobolds in this one here, but you had the dungeon crawling element at its core. This is what Dungeons and Dragons is all about. It's going through, killing some monsters, rolling around for some sweet loot, and doing checks everywhere. Doing checks is quintessential to the Dungeons & Dragons experience, and you wouldn't really appreciate it all that much unless you spent some time actually doing like the tabletop game and all that. Because I remember, like, whenever I play Dungeons & Dragons, whenever I go into the area, whenever I go into any new area, the first thing I ask my friend, the Dungeon Master, is always like, can I roll for perception? Always, all the time. That's one of the first things that you would want to do in any section, and it's one of those things that would enhance your ability, especially if you were, not your ability, enhancing your gameplay, and especially if you were a character with high perception and stuff like that. I was playing, of course, I tend to play archers, like, and here my character Ben is a is, of course, an archer, a hunter, ranger. And, of course, one of the things I like about playing at range is to end fights before they begin or play support role. Essentially, an archer is, especially with going off my experiences in the PvP so far, is a character that supports other characters by riddling them with arrows. And that... The traps, of course, are something that keep me on my toes. And you can tell that I don't have a very high perception, the fact that I just keep on walking in front of all those traps there. So, let's see, what else can I talk about? Well, I can talk about plenty. It's a big movie. So, I already talked about, like, the aspect, how it sort of is a more action-focused MMO. And I actually, before I actually had no idea that Neverwinter Nights was actually Dungeons & Dragons. I thought that was its own thing. I mean, when I was younger, I did a game coding summer camp, where I can't believe I was actually able to code it properly, how I was able to create multiple sections where a player could go from forest to like a cave and all that. I was able to do that one time. So I actually, at one point, was able to code a video game where I was able to set up stuff through a development kit. Now, I never knew that Neverwinter Nights was actually Dungeons & Dragons, but here, well, you just learned a couple things, right? So, it sort of, in a way, kind of mirrors the Old Republic in a way that some of its level design is, of course, theme park, where you have a central sort of hub area where there's trading and auction houses, which is really, really good. Everyone loves auction houses, especially if you have rare stuff you want to go out there and sell. Mounts, like a central sort of level thing. I actually got to put this back on there. That's called like the seismic, it's a seismic shot, that's what it's called, and it's one of your daily powers. Actually, I'll talk about those sort of things. Now, one of the things that, of course, I use is single shot and split shots. Those are your at-will powers. And anyone who's played Dungeons & Dragons understands the concepts of at-will powers or encounter powers or daily powers. Here, of course, you have your at-will powers. Your split shot and your single shot are your at-wills. You can use this anytime you want. But you also have your daily powers, and the game itself calls it daily powers, but they're not. Of course, in Dungeons & Dragons, daily powers would, of course, equate to one in-game day. Whereas here, it's if you earn enough, like, rage points or focus points, which comes from being attacked and from being injured, at which point that little D20 dice there, that in the center of the screen, fills up, and at what point you can actually do things like seismic shot. Now, at the point of this, after this recording, at the time I'm doing this recording, my voice recording, I've switched out that seismic shot for an additional thing where it allows me to cloak, move faster, and upon touching an enemy, I can deal damage. And I think, to be quite honest, I'd rather stick with the seismic shot because I love damaging a whole bunch of enemies in the path of the shot, drawing them away from me, and dealing like a buttload of damage. I mean, you can't really go wrong with it. And additionally, at this point, I've also become aware that you can jump between two different styles of gameplay. One of the cool things about playing a hunter is you have your range and your up-close attacks. Range, of course, being bows and arrows, and your closer ranged weaponry would be pretty much associated with daggers. Now, at a certain point, it'll allow you to switch over, which means that depending on your situation, you can basically hammer a person from a distance. Once they get too close, then it can switch over to your blades, and you can deal piercing hits, concussion hits, or one of the things I should do like a sort of a seismic hit. And that's pretty good because, like I said, it's context sensitive, especially if you're fighting someone even in PvP. You can catch them off guard by hitting them a couple times with arrows, switching over to your daggers, immobilizing them, and giving them an attack that causes bleed damage, which is very, very good if you want to deal some overtime damage as well. So even if you don't kill someone right away, it'll still possibly give a chance for a bleed out. Now I can talk about the pay to play, the free to play functions, because everyone knows as soon as you say free to play, microtransactions coming, and this is actually no exception. That is the tyrannical lockbox there. I've picked up about 5 of these already. This little purple glow means nothing. I was excited because I thought that I legitimately picked up... I thought that I actually picked up a very rare item. Of course, in MMOs, when you pick up a purple item, it means like, wow, really cool. I mean, you got lucky. You're going to get something badass in here. Well, not quite. Just like in Team Fortress 2, you need to purchase keys in order to open up these tyrannical lockboxes. And every now and again, you're going to see something like a text that goes over the screen that says, so-and-so has achieved this from a tyrannical lockbox. And I get that because a whole lot of games have done something like that, especially like Team Fortress, Counter-Strike, where they've done a thing where you can gain items from these things. And sometimes the items themselves are non-consequential, but other times they are. Here, it seems so far, things like mounts would come from there, or tokens of free movement. I don't really understand fully the concept behind the tokens. And but the mounts and all that, I'm pretty sure I could purchase mounts using in-game currency, but naturally when you're given the option, a whole lot of people would take the opportunity to use the meta currency. In this case, it's called Zen, which you have to purchase through the Zen market. That's what the little letter Z up there is.
Shove off. You got the
and
skulls? Good.
I understand at some point I probably might fold and actually like purchase some meta currency to buy a couple things, like, but here's the thing, here's the thing about that, where it sort of almost encourages, like, you want to be better, you're gonna have to buy our shiny stuff here, especially in player versus player. I mean, I don't really have a problem with it here in the PvE world where it's player versus instance or player versus environment. See, look, there's the sort of things in there that I was talking about where you can pick mounts, or you can pick something else, or drag a scale for crafting. And yeah, this didn't really sit well on me because I thought I was lucky. But that was my first lockbox. I've got 5 already in my inventory. 5 of them that, burning a hole in my pocket, I can't do anything with them. I could sell them, but I wouldn't even get 1 silver for it, which is kind of stupid given the worth there. Or I can put them, you know what, actually that's a good idea, I can probably put them on the auction market. I mean, I've got no use for them, at least until I buy the keys right there, which are going to cost about $10 of real world currency in order to unlock this crate. And I don't even know if it's luck getting an item that's actually useful to me or not. Now, I was talking about this sort of the aspects of the game, the elements, but I haven't really talked about the overarching thing, that it's an MMO on the Xbox One. And it's, to my knowledge, one of the first MMOs on the Xbox One. The cool thing is that this game was designed for PC, and you can tell, just simply for the virtue that it is an MMO, which would naturally thrive in a PC environment. But we have it here on the Xbox One. And it works. It's weird because you, just like an RTS on a console, you can't really comprehend the fact that an MMO would actually function in a similar capacity to its online counterpart until you actually see it in action. And at one point you sit back and you go, you know what, this isn't all that bad. It actually kind of works, and it does. The way that the hotbar is structured, of course, to allow multiple tiers of abilities, is mapped very well for the console. Now, let's be real here. This is not the game that would allow you to have row upon row upon row upon row upon row of hotkeys, just like a MMO like World of Warcraft had, where I would have maybe 3 bars of hotkeys at any given time, upon which I could do a cycle upon enemies. But this accomplishes the task fairly well, because you have a fair amount of abilities that accomplish the task, upon which you can keep enemies at bay. You can do crowd control. I imagine there's crowd control. I don't have anything yet. And the power function all just works well with the controller. It is a little quirky, though. There are some times where I've mishit a button, where it'll send me to something I wasn't expecting. In order to get to the inventory, I could use the start button, navigate over to items in inventory. But if I want to do it through the controller straight without hitting the pause button, I would have to hit the bumpers, one of the bumpers, I think it's right bumper, and then hit left on the D-pad in order to access my inventory. Or I have to hit bumper and hit up to go to my map. Now, there are like one or two buttons on the hotbar that I'm not quite too sure how to activate. I know one of them is my dodge ability, which is really, really cool, which is the one on the bottom left, but the one on the right, is that a run? Is that a sprint ability? I don't know how to access that. And by accident, I was able to toggle auto run, which I've never been able to replicate again. I probably have to go through the instructions to do, basically to do again. Otherwise, it's all pretty good. It's all pretty nice. A cool thing about this game is to invoke your deity. Now, of course, in Dungeons & Dragons, one of the things through character development that you can do is after you create your character, give them a background, give them a sort of purpose in life, one of the cool things you can do is give them a deity, give them a god to worship. So similar. Well, before I go ahead, this is what I was talking about. This is the sort of the map where you select all of your realms, your areas. That it kind of disappointing that it's not like World of Warcraft where it's a persistent space where you have to just select different instances and boom, loading screen, boom, loading screen. Disappointing, but you know what? I'm not too shooken up over it. So invoking your deity is when you pick a god. I picked Sylvanas, which is the guardian of the forest, which made perfect sense given that I'm playing a hunter ranger. Upon creating things like getting a deity and all that, one of the things the game tells you to do is, I think it's every hour or every 45 minutes, even though the game tells you pray every day, you can pray whenever your meter runs out. So the way it would work is, when you go to a thing like a fireplace, or when you're in Neverwinter, taking a look at the tower, think, well, that doesn't look quite right, now does it? Now, when you're around a fire, or when you're in Neverwinter, you go to an area that is surrounded by a blue aura. You might have seen it quite a few times, actually, during this video, where in this space you can pray to your god. And that's cool, because praying to your god allows you to get buffs, modifiers, and the alternative currency of the game called astral diamonds. They are rough astral diamonds. And those are necessary if you want the good stuff. And it's also a way that the game also allows you to drip this currency in, allowing you to purchase some of the higher ranked stuff when you're not quite using the pay function, buying the meta currency. It's delivered to you in rough astral diamonds, but of course you can refine them in the currency menu. And if you gain enough of this, then it will allow you to, well, purchase the higher tier items. That's good. That's good stuff. And it's often enough where you can continue to keep on using it. And I figured I'm actually going to play the game. It's actually quite a bit of an addiction for me right now, playing an MMO that's actually decent. But the frame rate issue, oh god, the frame rate issues. They jump in every now and again where it's chop, chop, chop. I wouldn't have a problem if they tried to maintain 30 frames a second. The game itself, the graphics, the textures are just fine. But the fact that we have, sorry about that, the fact that we have so much of a frame rate issue for all this irks me. That the game designers couldn't optimize a frame rate. And I know for a fact that they can do it because the game itself isn't all that graphically demanding. I'm not trying to run Crysis here on Ultra. It's just an MMO where you could have a good level of graphical fidelity while at the same time presenting a fairly good frame rate. It's not rocket scientist. I'm not a rocket scientist. It's not rocket science. I'm not asking for a whole lot here. But you can do it. But I assume that there's going to be multiple patches that are going to be coming out that could fix this issue. And I think that the Perfect World, I think, made this. I think they're probably aware of this. It would have to be. I mean, it's one of the most glaring issues of the game. One of the other issues I have is that when you're creating a character, no matter what you create, you'll all end up in the same place. One of the great things about World of Warcraft was that there was a sense of two different factions. And of course, there were two different factions, the Alliance and the Horde, where you could create someone of either side, good or evil, and you would end up in different parts of the map. Now, I haven't tried to create a second character yet, and fucking second tyrannical lockbox. And I realized at that point, it means nothing. And that's, if you want to get something cool, you gotta pay up. So, when you create a character, you spawn on the beach just outside Neverwinter. And in World of Warcraft, whenever you make someone, you get the option to pick their faction. So this makes the difference in your spawning location, which means that you can be in totally different areas of the map, where you can allow different parts of exploration. And again, it gives the sense of this wide world in Azeroth, where you could basically be on two different sides of the continent. You just don't get it here, where everyone goes through Neverwinter, where everyone plays on the same side. There's no option to be a bad guy, or from the perspective of the good guys, you're the bad guy. And this is also something that Star Wars The Old Republic managed to get right, because in two different characters, I never played Jedi in that game. I never played a Jedi, because I felt that Jedi oversaturate the Star Wars universe. I know that's sacrilege, because half the entire purpose of the Star Wars universe is to have some sort of emphasis on the Jedi and the Force. And I felt, no, I don't want to play a Jedi. I've been playing Jedi for nearly 20 years of Star Wars games. I want to try something new. So I made a perfect effort to play as a Republic trooper, and then as an Imperial agent. And the Imperial agent actually has one of the best stories in the game. It also starts on a planet called Dromund Kaas, which is the capital of the Sith Empire in the game. And it's one of the more interesting locations in the game that is an evil background planet. But it gave you the option to start in different places. You could start on Ord Mantell, you could start on Tython, or you could start on Dromund Kaas, or anywhere else, or Nal Hutta, depending on your background. And that was good, because it tried to be like World of Warcraft in that sense. This also tries to be like World of Warcraft. Make no mistake, this has some of the earmarks of like the World of Warcraft style of layout, user interface, and the style of currency, of course, which is copper, gold, silver, which is standard in hack and slash medieval MMOs. But would it kill people to really just stand out and try something a little bit different? That I understand, easier said than done. And like there would be, of course, some people who would say, well, why don't you just make it yourself? And no, I lack that ability. I don't know how to make an MMO. I can barely code a cash register. Which is, well, more than some people can do, but I'm now nowhere near the ability of being able to code the next great American MMO. But there are people that can. But there are people that can try something different. And have tried something different, but it just seems that this made sense to a lot of people. That this style of MMO, and it's not a bad style of MMO, the fact that World of Warcraft is still so popular after all this time proves this, that this style works. But the fact of the matter is, we have to try to branch out where we can still have our creative freedom in terms of what our game looks like. But also to stick to the basics of an MMO that we know works. And that's why I tend to gravitate towards Neverwinter, and that it still maintains some of that familiarity. It maintains a lot of that familiarity, but it also served as something new, in the sense that it was an MMO on a console. I understand MMOs on a console have happened before. I mean, the PlayStation 3 had DC Universe Online, and Final Fantasy XIV, which I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of Final Fantasy XIV because it came immediately after Final Fantasy XIII. And I played enough of Final Fantasy XIII to know that I hated Final Fantasy XIII, but they still tried to keep on pushing Final Fantasy XIII for at least 3 or 4 more games, Then Final Fantasy XIV, which was so bad, they actually had to retract the game, issue an apology for it, and then re-release it, which was somewhat better, but it was still full of bitch quest. Send pie to somebody. But it was decent. Decent enough that you could play it and still get that sense of adventure. Like, animeism aside, but that's neither here nor there. My own issues with anime. I never got into it. Eastern MMOs still don't really do it for me, but I did play them in the past. Like, oh, I forgot to mention Ragnarok was a game that I played back when. Didn't play it for long because I was still quite young at the time and I didn't really get the installation process of the game or like the concept behind the money and all that. If I went back to it now, I probably would. Yeah. Different but the same. It's trying to balance those qualities of trying to be unique in the gaming environment while still retaining some of your heritage. Look, that was 2 tyrannical lockboxes I picked up in this one area alone. It's... I hate it. I hate it, but you still play it anyway. Because the game itself is actually quite fun and good. And that's why I'll probably go back to it for a little while. I'll probably even play to the end game. And probably make a new character. Probably go into the PvP. Because I enjoyed it enough. I enjoyed it enough to keep on playing. And I think that's something that the game did right. And unlike Destiny, a good thing that this game did right was loot. Why is it so hard to create a good loot system? And the fact that you're constantly getting different, like the weapons that are so different but feel the same. Of course, like going to Diablo 3, which is loot central, like the other Diablo, any other Diablo games. I'm also considering picking up Borderlands, the Handsome Collection, but not before Mortal Kombat, which by my watch comes out in about 2 days. Hee. Happy about that. But about Mortal Kombat, which is one of my favorite fighting games of all time ever since I was a little lad playing Mortal Kombat 3 on my Sega Genesis. Here I have Neverwinter, a very, very decent free-to-play MMO on my Xbox One. And I'm happy to play it. I'm happy that it's free. I'm happy that it contains a decent bit of depth and great lore. Especially since in Dungeons & Dragons you have such a great opportunity to create lore because Dungeons & Dragons emphasizes creation of worlds and story building, and that's one of the reasons why I gravitate towards it. But I let my friends always play Dungeon Masters and create the world because they're better at it. And one of my friends can be a vengeful god of a DM. But that's the way I like it. Because when you have an environment that has such a good bit of lore behind it, it keeps you going because you want to read that flavor text. You want to know what everything is. And granted, Neverwinter doesn't have the same level as lore as, say, Mass Effect or World of Warcraft, because World of Warcraft already had books and books out. Now, come to think of it, I'm pretty sure that Dungeons & Dragons had a whole bunch of books as well. I wonder if Neverwinter probably had some books, like Neverwinter Nights back then. But it's decent enough to get you flipping through the books and like learning everything like about all the different districts or the gods and all that, and like the mythology, the terminology of this world, and the fact that you can allocate all your skill points and all that help enhance your combat. Staple of an MMO, but still good, like to consider exactly what do you want. Do I want that extra stamina, or do I want that extra damage, or do I want that movement bonus? It's good because you're making these decisions and it's making like the gameplay enjoyable for you. So to wrap it all up, good game that I want to keep on playing. Neverwinter is a sign that MMOs can indeed work on consoles. It's a reaffirmation of this, that MMOs can work on consoles, because I'm playing one. And I was able to get close to level 20 now. So, it has to work. It does work. Because I'm playing it. You've been watching me play it for about 35 minutes while listening to me talk about it. And it's done in a way where it's not a straight port, where you're not navigating through 10 or so menus, just trying to figure out how to summon your companion or how to access your inventory. It's done in such a way where it takes advantage of the controller's mapping and actually does it in a way that kind of intuitive, but in a way that also is a lack of frustration, where it tries to be good. And it is. If it weren't for the frame rate issues, this game would be fantastic. If I were to give it a rating, if I would, but even though this isn't a review, this would be a solid 8 for me, because it's a good game. It has good movement, it has good gameplay mechanics, it has a great world, it has a decent loot system. The user interface itself is rather intuitive, given the console, the limitation of the console real estate. And it's just fun to play and go through. I'm interested to see how it is with the Elder Scrolls Online when it comes out, and when I pick it up and when I play it, to see how it stands up. But as it is, as a free-to-play MMO, Neverwinter is good. I would recommend playing it. You got nothing to lose, it's free. Anyways, thank you for bearing through this with me. Hopefully you enjoyed this little introspection about this and enjoyed my thoughts on the matter, and I hope that you try this game out. Neverwinter, it's free on the Xbox One, PC, maybe the PS4, I don't know. This is Zach Schwillen. I'm signing off. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.